as the warm country rain gushes down on a parched earth in the dead of night. It brings to memory a story my grandpa used to tell me. I don't come out to the old family farm often now that he has passed on, but there was some unfinished business to attend to that led me here. No, it doesn't have anything to do with the story I'm about to tell you. It's completely coincidental that I happen to be here on a night such as this. Although, if the story he told was true, which I am starting to wonder if it wasn't, then this may be a deadly coincidence. It was the summer of 1918, if I remember his tale correctly. The heat had been oppressive that year. Humidity so high that small water puddles would form on any flat surface. An oddity for sure, even in rural Nebraska. And that swelter the livestock had become lethargic. The corn out in the field popped from the sun. The last bit, I figure, is an exaggeration. Locals took the rest to be a bad omen as some of the cows had passed, most likely due to heat exhaustion, but their remains had been ravaged. I would assume it was from wild animals that couldn't pass up an easy meal. Grandpa claimed that some of the animals had been ripped in half and torn to shreds. Again, I always thought these were hyperbole from a superstitious past. It made sense that a group of farmers without knowledge of weather patterns and with no means to do an autopsy would make up supernatural explanations to their predicament. Here is where the story departs from speculation to a first-hand account, however. Outside his house was pitch black. Moonlight refused to shine, and dark clouds swollen with rain filled the sky. If you've ever been in Nebraska during the summer, then you know how loud the crickets can get in the evening. On this particular night, there was no sound. Everything was dead quiet. Even the air refused to move. Fear of some obscure entity forbid it. Smothered in the unforgiving humidity, the oppressiveness wrapped everything like a wet blanket. As my granddad used to say, it felt as if the blackness was pushing in on you. He and his parents sat in the living room, reading as he played with his wooden toys. Each of them couldn't shake the feeling that something unknown was about to happen. Something very troubling. 10:30, the tension broke. Loud claps of thunder erupted from the sky off in the distance. This caused the earth to shake. These were no usual rolls of thunder. They sounded like the hooves of fiery horses as they rode in from some unseen direction. Echoes of laughter could be heard in their wake, a menacing cackle, faint, but clearly there. My grandpa looked up at the ceiling in bewilderment, while his father threw down the paper he was reading and gripped the armrest of his rocking chair. A look of dread crossed his normally stoic face. Bright blue eyes squinted in concentration. A hint of perspiration formed on his furrowed brow. His mother dropped her glass of sherry from trembling hands onto the wooden floor. With a pop, shards of glass flew to the far corners of the large, yet sparsely furnished room. Usually her dainty figure was calm and collected. Even when his father had been kicked by a mule and everyone said he wouldn't make it, she remained poised as always. Now her small frame shivered like a twig from the sound that came from above. White knuckles regained their color as his father loosened his grip on the armrests. His mother smoothed the folds of her dress to regain composure. "Off to bed with you," his father spoke in a hurried manner. His mother quickly jumped up from the couch to retrieve a broom to clean the dangerous broken pieces. Hurriedly along the stairs he was rushed. Great-grandpa stopped every time there was another thunderbolt and looked around nervously. "What's wrong, Dad?" Grandpa would ask him. "I don't know," he said with eyes that stared off as if to see into the distance. "But it's best if you're tucked away safe upstairs in your bed." As only a boy of 10 years of age, my grandpa had no idea what to make of it all. He could only do as he was told, and trust that his parents would keep him safe. Stripped down to his underwear, he was practically shoved into bed. Blankets tucked around him so as to strap him down. Prayers were said. "Heavenly Father, keep this young boy safe tonight from any harm that may befall him. Send your holy angels to guard this house. Amen." This was not the usual prayer of thanks that was said at night, and despite the attempted reassurance, a feeling of anxiousness crept over my granddad. Sounds of pounding hooves continued to roll in, each time followed by the incessant cackle. Closer and closer they came at each peal. Finally, it seemed as though they were right above the house. One last shriek tore through the night before the heavens burst open with a torrential downpour. Through the bedroom window, now fogged by rain, my grandpa could see small lights off in the distance. Apparitions appeared. They looked to be people who pounded in stakes with mallets. Over the course of a couple of hours, tents popped up here and there. More lights formed, the fires flickered and sputtered, but never went out. How they could be lit in this rain was beyond my grandfather. Finally, one last and great tent went up. It was the largest of them all. On top fluttered a flag. Vague music filled the air, the haunting sounds of an organ off in the distance. It was now around 2 a.m, according to his estimation. No one stirred in the house. He wondered if he was the only one who could hear the music. With great trepidation and curiosity, he crept down the old creaky stairs of his farmhouse. He knew his parents would never let him go and investigate, so he left them undisturbed in their slumber. Maybe it was because he was the only one left awake at that dreadful hour, or it could be that the music put the rest under a spell. He wasn't sure, but the sounds called to him, and no one was there to stop his inquisitive young mind from exploring. Silently, he slipped on his rain gear and headed out the wooden door. Once outside, the rain stopped, just as fast as it had started. The wind had now returned. It seemed to push him on towards his destination. Through the cornfield he made his way. Unsure of where to go among the tall stalks, he could only follow his ears. Halfway across the seemingly endless rows, a voice could finally be heard.
"Come one, come all, to the 100-year extravaganza. For the first time in a century, see the likes of which will astound you. The one, the only, the great Asmodeus."
My grandfather pressed on, excited to see a circus.
"Death-defying magic, feats of unbelievable skill, and electrifying showmanship. Watch as he saws a woman in half, makes objects and people disappear before your very eyes, and can even read your mind."
To a country bumpkin such as Grandpa, this must have sounded incredible. He quickly pushed through the rest of the way before he came to a large clearing. It was smack dab in the middle of 4 farms. His, the Johnsons, the Bakers, and old Jed Hetchfield's. As he exited the cornstalks, he looked around and saw Jack Baker step out as well. Jack was one of my grandpa's closest friends at the time. He was long and lanky for an 11-year-old. Kind of resembled a scarecrow if you looked at him just right. Jack ran up to him with a huge grin across his shallow face. "This is unbelievable. What you reckon brought it here?" Jack asked with excitement in his voice. "I can't rightly say," Grandpa replied, unsure of what to make of it all. They took a moment to look around and go through all the tents. In one, there was a man that had scales all over his body. Half fish, half man, the acclaimed Dagon, the sign read. They marveled at his bluish-green skin and how realistic the scales looked. In the next one, there was a cage that housed a griffin. At first, my grandpa believed the wings and beak were tied onto the creature, but when it unfurled the wings, he couldn't see where the rope was that might bind them. In another tent, there were oddities from all over. A crystal ball that, if stared into, would show you various parts of the world. When Grandpa took a look, he could see what seemed to be like people in China getting ready for their dinner. This was before television, mind you. Grandpa had no clue how these pictures in color came to be. Lastly, there was a glass box. The sides and top had all been painted black. It knocked about as something moved inside. "Warning, cockatrice inside," read the sign on the front. Other people from the nearby town continually made their way into the circus area. A few of them were still in their sleepwear. Mrs. Johnson and old Jed were there as well. The boys ran up to her, happy to see a familiar face. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson. Hello, Mr. Hetchfield," Jack called out. They gave no response as they walked into the center tent. In fact, all the adults they saw walking around seemed to be in a trance. There were a few other children, and they all responded when greeted. "Guess the adults are too excited to notice us," Jack stated. I figure they haven't seen a circus in a while, my grandpa responded, a little perplexed by all of this.
The main event is about to begin,
called the crier from the entrance of the big top.
Hurry up, others are dying to get in,
he finished. The boys looked at each other, then bolted to the opening of the tent. Once inside, they saw grandstands that almost reached the top of the 20-foot-tall structure. It hadn't looked that big from the outside, but on the inside there was plenty of room for the crowd that had gathered. People they didn't recognize were in there mixed among some they had seen before. The faces of the newcomers were odd. They almost looked like plastic. Both the boys assumed these were just masks that had been purchased for the occasion. They hurriedly took a seat. Not that far up, about at the center, they got a good view of what was to unfold. Fire burst forth from the ground in a grand display of pyrotechnics. Zings, pops, whizzes, and booms filled the tent. Streams of golden sparks, purple smoke, red and blue bolts of fireworks blasted from every direction. Applause and cheers came from all the members of the audience. Then, out of the smoke, rose a lone figure. My grandpa recalls he was about 8 feet in height, with a build that would put a strong man to shame. Tuxedo with tails along with a large top hat adorned him. Horns protruded out of his head, curling around the sides of the hat. He had fangs that hung past his lower lip. Other than that, he looked like any other man my granddad had ever seen. Take a look at those. You reckon they're fake? Jack asked as he pointed to the horns and teeth. I reckon they are, my grandfather responded. They look grand, Jack replied.
Welcome, welcome, one and all, to the 100-year celebration. Never again in your lifetime will you see tricks such as these. They are sure to amaze and bewilder you beyond all comprehension. I can assure you that none of the magic you see tonight is fake. There are no gimmicks, doodads, or thingamajigs that aid in the tricks you will observe.
The man scanned the room. The audience was held captivated by him.
How is that possible, you may ask? I would tell you the answer, but then I would have to kill you.
Grandpa swears he stared him dead in the eye when he said this. Jack would also say the same.
A good magician never reveals his secrets. But enough talk. You came to see the great Asmodeus perform.
He ran around the ring as all the smoke encircled him. The purple, gray, blue, and red formed layers in the funnel with him in the middle. Faster and faster he went. When all the smoke formed an impenetrable shield that hid him from sight, a loud clap echoed throughout the tent. In an instant, all the smoke vanished, which left Asmodeus in the middle of the ring. Cheers and applause erupted. The great Asmodeus took his bow.
For my next trick, I will need a volunteer,
he said in a voice that boomed. All the kids' hands shot up except for my grandpa. He felt uneasy at this place. There was something amiss, he would say.
I'm sorry, children. We have a big surprise for you at the end of the show. For now, let the grown-ups have some fun,
the magician said with a deep chuckle. An old man in the back stood up and raised his hand.
Ah, Mr. Hedgefield. So good of you to volunteer,
Asmodeus said while he motioned him down. How do you think he knows his name? Jack asked in a whisper. I'm not sure, Grandpa responded. The old man walked all the way down to the center of the ring.
Mr. Hedgefield, for all the curious ones out there, have we ever met before?
No, was the old man's response.
Good, good, Asmodeus said. Now, if you would be so kind as to step into this box.
Old Hedgefield did as he was told and stepped into the tall black box.
Watch as Mr. Hedgefield disappears right before your very eyes,
the magician told the crowd. He didn't even close the box. A flash of light and a puff of smoke appeared. When the smoke cleared, Mr. Hedgefield was gone. I read about this in a magazine. Old Man Hedgefield will reappear in a bit. Just watch. Not moments after Jack said this, a scream could be heard throughout the tent.
On to our next trick,
Asmodeus stated while the box was pulled out of sight.
For this one, we already have a volunteer. Mrs. Johnson, please come out.
Another large box was wheeled out, this one horizontal with Mrs. Jackson laying inside of it. Her head and feet stuck out of the box, but the rest of her was covered. Organ music began to play, a sort of upbeat song that had missed notes here and there, that gave it a twisted sound.
For your enjoyment tonight, I will cut Mrs. Johnson in half. Stare in disbelief as she is sawed in two with this very dull blade. Never before have you seen someone in so much pain.
A large rusty saw magically appeared in the magician's hand. This one better be done right. He's supposed to saw her in half and put her back together, Jack said under his breath. The only ones to cheer at the announcement of this trick were all the spectators that wore the masks. They clapped and stood up. Grandpa thought some of them drooled a bit as they waited. Mrs. Jackson lay there silently as the metal began to move back and forth in a gap in the wooden box. Blood spurt forth and dripped to the ground. Her eyes shot open. Screams tore from her mouth as the saw continued its morbid cut. "You reckon she's faking it?" Jack asked. "I don't reckon," Grandpa replied. "Then she's really..." Jack trailed off, his voice gone cold. "We need to get out of here," Grandpa said. The masked observers burst into applause while the boys made their way through the crowd. Underneath an arm of one of the disguised onlookers, Grandpa watched as the magician pulled the box apart. Guts and blood spilled into the dirt, creating a morbid scene. This made the boys move faster. Through the crowd they navigated as silently as possible. Some of the children they saw had looks of horror cast upon their face. They attempted to move, but the disguised people held them firmly in their place.
Now, for my last trick. I will read the minds of all the children here. The time for the finale is upon us,
the magician said in a booming voice.
I can tell that you are all afraid.
Great laughter emitted from all the veiled spectators.
My friends, you have had your show. It is time for the meal,
Asmodeus cried out. With that, all the masks came off. Underneath were hideous faces that made my grandfather shudder every time he thought of them. Long, sharp fangs, snouts like pigs, and eyes sunken into their skulls caused the two boys to retch at their sight. Grandpa dodged the hand of one attacker. Jack wrestled free of another. Out the entrance of the tent they made their escape. Behind them, the screams of all the children that were left could be heard. The boys ran into the pitch black of the cornfield as fast as they could, too terrified to look back. My great-grandparents were astonished to find both boys in my grandpa's room the next day, huddled together in a corner, holding each other as they trembled. Grandpa says that many children and adults went missing that night. The local constable set out search parties, but no trace of them could be found. The only evidence was a black circle of withered crops where the boys said the circus had been. To this day, no one has come up with a plausible explanation. Grandpa knew what happened, and he passed on his story. I always thought it was a story told to scare me from sneaking out at night. That was until I came here to settle up his estate. It's been 100 years since that happened. Tonight the rain is coming down in buckets. As I look out the window, where his room used to be, I can see lights flicker off in the distance. The sound of organ music, though subtle, can be heard from the same direction. Thank you for watching. We'll always have room for you here when you visit. To keep up on great content like this, like, subscribe, and please share. Have a nice day.